Join me for a conversation with Stephen Allen, Avid Adventurer instructor who has worn many hats, from managing risk management to being the director of Stoke and enthusiasm, as he shares his insights into kids in the outdoors, therapeutic recreation, and how these things have played out in his life. Join us. Welcome to the Avid Adventurer. I'm your host, Dave Secunda, founder of Avid Adventurer, and I am psyched you're here. Each week, just like today, I'll bring you an interview with a kiddo, young adult, or parent as they share not only the details of their noteworthy outdoor pursuits, but also how they navigate risk, challenge, setbacks, and service in their journey. It'll bring a smile to your face, and you'll feel your heart expand as you get to know the inner landscapes of these athletes. After listening, I know you'll feel uplifted and ready for your own next Avid adventure. So let's dive in. Stephen, I am so happy that you're here. I actually have a huge smile on my face just thinking about where you're coming to us from today. And it's a place that's near and dear to my heart. I'll let you share that a little bit. But your reputation precedes you. You've been working at Avid for a number of years, wearing a number of different hats, all tied together kind of with this thread of passion and stoke for the outdoors, and a little eye towards risk management and some kind of therapeutic rec outcomes as well. So I'm excited to have the conversation with you today. But let me start by handing it to you to just introduce yourself and your pronouns and where you are, and set the stage.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Dave. I can't help but smile thinking about Avid and thinking about all the great experiences there. But yeah, my name is Stephen Allen, and my pronouns are he, him, his. And I'm calling in today from Fontainebleau, France, which is a really historic climbing area, really close to Paris. And, it's actually it's much later for me here than you. So if you hear something yawning, I had to have a little coffee pretty late in my day for this. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks for stretching the boundaries on your day. I'm going to start with a couple questions just for listeners to get to know you. The first is, what are you really proud of or excited about in the things that you've done in the outdoors? What do you want to share with folks?
There's kind of three ways that I'd like to answer that question. First, I'm just so grateful for the experiences that I got to have outside when I was growing up. I went camping for so many birthdays in elementary school and middle school, and I don't think that I got to really appreciate how special that was at the time. But looking back, it's some really fond memories I have with me and my family. A big culmination of those experiences growing up was I actually climbed Mount Meru in Tanzania with my parents, which is actually right next to Kilimanjaro. It's a little bit less tall, but I think it's really great because you get to look at Kilimanjaro while you're hiking Mount Meru. So I'm so proud of those experiences and just so proud of that love. I'm also really proud of some of the work that I've done with sharing adventure experiences with Avid and with some other organizations. It's just so awesome to be able to not only love climbing and love mountain biking and love being outside, but to also be able to see other people and see kids develop that love. You get a fresh start all the time. It's such a gift. I think the last thing that I'm just really proud of is some of the researching that I've done around the value of adventure experiences and some of the theories and philosophies around why these are so powerful in our lives and why they can have such a positive impact and why we love them. Yeah.
That's a great start point. It gives lots of areas to return to, and I will make sure that we kind of dig in a little bit further on some of the work that you've done in your degree, and give an opportunity to share that with folks as well. But before we dig in on that, I often ask guests to complete the sentence: "If you really knew me, you'd know that," and just take it from there and share something with folks.
Yeah, I think if you really knew me, you'd know how passionate I am about rock climbing, and about service. You know, those two things are really what I structure so much of my life around. And often, the last thing I think about before going to bed, and the thing that really helps me wake up in the morning. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, let's start there. Let's dig in a little bit more. When when you think about those things, how does it then manifest in who you are and what you do going forward? I mean, obviously, you're coming to us from a bouldering and climbing trip in France at Fontainebleau, which is obviously one expression of the adventure lifestyle and traveling internationally. But talk about both of those things, that commitment to service and that passion for climbing, and how it shows up.
Yeah. I think I live in Boulder, and I work as a housing case manager. So what that means is I help people who live in Boulder County who have been experiencing some insecurity with their housing, kind of get better connected to housing security. So maybe that means finding housing, maybe that means helping them keep their housing if it's at risk. And that's my main job.
Hmm.
That's what I'm doing 40 hours a week, sometimes more. Um, and it's something I put just a lot of thought into, and a lot of work around trying to do that as best as I can. It inspires me to really read a lot about how to be supportive of other people, and also just about like what's going around in our world. What kind of factors above us and above people's individual choices are at play right now, and are affecting people's lives. Um, climbing will always be something that just brings me so much joy. Um, it's I I love going to the climbing gym after work because I have time to, and it's just such a fun way to, after really being in my brain a lot, to kind of drop down into my body, to move, to play. And sometimes after having conversations in my day that can be intense, it can be stressful. Really dropping into play is kind of how I just connect with that, still very, very real childish part of myself that likes to explore and likes to have fun. So I think I really just find a lot of balance between those two things. I get to do something for others in my day, and I also get to do something for myself in my day. And to add one more thing, Dave, I love how climbing gives me this way to kind of like structure my life around things that I also really love. I love travel. I love friends. I love being in nature. And climbing kind of almost like paves this like way to make that just like a little bit easy, and just provides a little bit of structure around that. It helps me make easy choices about where I can go outside to play, and it keeps me bringing puffies outside, in the winter, even when it's 40 degrees out, be like, I'm still going to be outside all day, and having, my thermos full of tea, even though it's, January and it's a cold January, Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Certainly, I wish that listeners could actually see you as you're talking about this, because every time you start talking about climbing, you have like this beaming smile that comes forward, and you kind of are exuding what it seems like you're talking about that's going on the inside. Is just this unbounded artesian well of enthusiasm. Well, let's turn back the pages a little bit. Talk about your time at Avid Adventurer. As I said, you wore a lot of different hats, from climbing specialist to what was called the risk management czar of one of our camp programs, to working with groups in our adventure programs, etc. But one of these roles that you had, since we're talking about it, was really like the ambassador of Stoke, so to speak. Like the person who was responsible for bringing that enthusiasm forward either formally or informally. Tell me about that and just kind of how it showed up in your work at Avid and what that even meant.
Oh, that's such a good question. Yeah, I think I certainly was known for being very stoked. Being very excited. And I think what I'd like to share about that, Dave, is that that was a conscious choice every day. That was not just this natural way of being. It was a choice that I did my best to make every day, and I certainly didn't make it every day. Just be really excited about what's going on, and to when I was with a co-instructor, to really just like see what awesome things they were bringing today and seeing how we can really pull all that awesomeness out. And I'd also like to add that, you know, I felt really excited, really stoked every day at Avid because I was working with people like, you know, Nate Thorson and Cassidy Morris, who were just like so empowering. Like I just showed up every day and I was like, I was excited and they kind of saw that excitement. They were like, hey, bring some more of that, like try something new out. And there's just this like, there's this like huge sense of like comfortability that I felt even on my first day of Avid one-on-one that let me be like, that let me feel as though I could kind of bring that level of excitement every day. Yeah. So
Well,
many good memories. Yeah.
I mean, you're sharing. It's like you brought it with staff, and staff still talk about you and this like unbounded stoke, as they would say, and kids, totally memorable kids. But I will also say one of the stories that still circulates is with parents and how this stoke would come across in parents. So much so that I heard this story that this parent was just like, I got to talk to the camp director because I think this guy is on drugs because he is clearly so positive and enthusiastic. There's got to be something else going on around this. Is that a true story or is that one of those like camp myths?
That is a true story. I think that there's been like a little game of telephone that
uh,
kind of turned it around. Really, I think that if I remember this correctly, that this was 2017. Um, the parent hadn't really heard the word stoked before, and they heard me say it with kids. Like
yeah.
it was Explorer Camp, and we were about to go, biking around Wash Park in Denver, and I was like, "Hey, are you?" Like, kids would get dropped off, and I would sign them in, and I would invite them over to our group game, and I would ask the kids in front of the parents, "Hey, are you super stoked to go biking today?" And I think that the parent thought that I was like suggesting, like, "Are you under the influence enough to go biking?" Because I was like, "Hey, I'm stoked. Are you stoked? Like, are you stoked enough?" And like, uh, so I think what happened was Nate Thorson had to Google what Stoke meant on the phone with the parent and tell him, hey, this is what this means. And like, he certainly doesn't mean to suggest like, are your kids under the influence to be ready to go mountain biking? I'd like to add, you shouldn't bike under the influence.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for that disclaimer. That's
Yeah.
clearly wearing your risk management czar hat. Like, by the way, disclaimer on this. But I got to say the real non-telephone story is better than the one that I heard. So that is thank you for sharing that. That is
Yeah.
amazing. Well, okay,
Um,
so yeah, go ahead.
One more quick thing. I'm also no fault to that parent. That parent is not the first person who has assumed that about me. I'm not someone who drinks alcohol.
Mhm.
And this past year I went to a couple of weddings, and I love dancing at weddings. It's one of my favorite things. Uh, and I'll have people come up to me, when I'm dancing at a wedding, be like, "Hey, I think you might need to, be done drinking for the night." And I'm like, I haven't even started, And that's like, but I'm just having so much fun, and like,
Oh
yeah.
man, that is amazing. I definitely want to invite you to my next party day. to bring that vibe. That's great. I love
Yeah,
it. Well, okay, so we've talked a little bit about, personally how important the outdoors and climbing has been in your life, and just kind of you showing up with this palpable and contagious enthusiasm, which again is one of these things that's just this reputation that precedes you. When people talk about you, that's one of the things they really talk about. And then you've continued to study and kind of carve out your career in this area of social work and therapeutic work. So talk a little bit about like your perspective on the role of challenging experiences and outdoor experiences in fostering just personal growth and interpersonal growth for kids and for all of us.
definitely. Yeah. So there's a lot of different directions that you can go with that question, and I'm going to empower you, Dave, to help me not get too nerdy and to
Okay.
keep those appropriate for our audience of parents and kids and other people related to Avid. Because give the opportunity to, I will get super nerdy, and
Okay.
I'll. Anyways,
I'll pull you back. I'll pull you back if you go too far.
definitely. But I think that like curiosity really started with an observation. And that observation was that when people like ourselves, Dave, are talking about experiences like going climbing or going mountain biking, and why we choose to keep those experiences as a part of our life, and also why we want to share them with others. Often in that conversation, I've noticed that people end up mentioning aspects of these experiences, these positive outcomes, these positive things that we get from being outside, from you know challenging ourselves, that really sound to me a lot like therapy goals. You know,
Mhm.
they're like being able to manage stress better, maybe
Mhm.
being able to feel like these lofty goals you have in your life, they're achievable. They're not something that exists out here, that they're something that you can work towards. And maybe it's just about feeling like you're more comfortable with others, and that you can build relationships, and that you can practice trust. Uh, so working at Avid and working at some other places, and also being someone who loves being outside and participating in these experiences, I kind of noticed like was this little similarity here. You know, riding a mountain bike, or even like, going to a high ropes course, that looks nothing like a therapist's office, right? Totally
Mhm.
different thing.
Mhm.
And yet there's kind of this like overlap
Mhm.
of what you can maybe get out of those. So I really spent a lot of time researching adventure therapy during my undergrad degree. And I want to quickly read you the definition of adventure therapy. Um, and that is the prescriptive use of adventure experiences provided by mental health professionals, often conducted in natural settings, that kinesthetically engage clients on a cognitive, affective, and behavioral level. Um, so I want to break that down just a little bit. There's some big words there, specifically, um, you know, settings that kinesthetically engage clients. That really just means that we're getting people to move. We're getting them to do things and participate in activities. And then engaging people on cognitive, affective, and behavioral levels. That means that we're inviting some kind of change in how we think, in how we feel, and what we choose to do. So adventure therapy is this whole realm of programs that exist, as well as a philosophy, a modality that the people study, where we're using stuff like rock climbing, like mountain biking, like backpacking to accomplish, these changes in how we think, feel, and what we choose to do. Uh, yeah,
I love it. Yeah, it does make me reflect a little bit on the mission of Avid for Adventure. And 20 years ago, it's hard to believe we're 20 years in now, but I remember sitting down to really craft that mission with some other folks. And the mission of the organization is to engage kids in active outdoor lifestyles and to kind of, really create a connection with the outdoors that kids will return to and feel confident and comfortable in for the rest of their lives. And there was a real discussion at the beginning of like, well, do we want to incorporate something about skills development and, the importance of progressions? And really, when it came down to it, I felt like our goal as an organization is to build this deep connection with the outdoors, where in some ways, that definition that you're talking about, it's kind of a deliberate use of it. But I've also found like this magic in the outdoors where it doesn't always have to be deliberate with prescribed outcomes per se. And clearly adventure therapeutic situations kind of tend to have an outcome goal in mind. But my experience of the outdoors has just been, it has been a place of solace. It has been a place of stress reduction and presence and calm and a place to confront fears directly, all of those things without necessarily saying that's what I'm up to. It's kind of like the secret sauce there.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's, I love that you brought up the mission of Avid Adventurer, that we empower kids to choose active outdoor lifestyles. And I actually want to add one thing to that definition
Let's hear it.
that I've noticed that's a little bit behind the scenes, but I think that there's also a really big part of being trained as an Avid Adventurer staff member is our environmental briefings. And there's a really big philosophy behind those, and I'd say that philosophy is that in addition to choosing and empowering kids to choose these active outdoor lifestyles, we also want to empower kids to be able to evaluate and choose appropriate risks in their lives. Going back to that thing I was mentioning about how these adventure experiences often overlap with these, therapeutic goals. So many parents want to support their kids in evaluating and managing risk. It's something that I'm sure as a parent, Dave, probably kept you up at night for a while. I'm sure a lot of parents, what I'm saying is now, can probably relate to that feeling of kind of being scared that, there's things that might come up for your kid, choices and experiences that, at the end of the day, they're going to have to face that themselves. And it's, I think, a scary thing for a lot of parents. And this idea of, training kids, or at least preparing them to navigate those risks and situations, that's a focus of a lot of therapists. That's a focus of a lot of programs. And at Avid, we actually have a really cool and unique way of training kids to do that, of preparing those. We want to train kids not to be super risk adverse and to see some risky and run. But we want to train kids not to also follow a strict rule book of if this risk situation comes up, we're going to do this and this and this. Instead, through our use of environmental briefings, which, and I might butcher this just a little bit, we're training kids to recognize when a risky situation is arising. We're training them to being able to look at what is making that situation risky. And we're also training them to figure out what choices that they can make to exist within that risk or avoid it altogether. That's a really cool and unique way of navigating risk. And what it adds to the conversation about risk is that there can be good parts of risk. Anyone who works in finance will tell you, you can't just be strictly risk adverse, because on the other side of some risk is these wonderful, powerful experiences. And at the same time, kids and young adults up until you turn about 26, the part of our brain that can really look at what makes a situation dangerous, that's not developed yet. But the
Mm-hmm.
part of our brain, the amygdala, that can feel reward and pleasure and excitement, that part is developed. So
Mm-hmm.
we need to prepare kids for this experience. And that's such a huge part about Avid. It's cool how those goals kind of work together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm 100% with you on this one. We're actually looking at some changes in the environmental briefing just to really continue to refine kids' ability to develop that judgment, because it feels like if we're able to do that, that's probably, the best thing that we can do out there in the
Definitely.
field in order to really support kids. Um, so I'm going to come back to that in a minute.
Yeah.
But before I do, one of the other things that you were known for in kind of talking about this like interaction with risk is the ability to kind of put kids at ease. And a lot of times when kids come into a situation, they would have fear or trepidation about a potential activity or that sort of a thing. How do you navigate that as far as like how much to invite versus push into these bigger situations that you feel like professionally and personally have a lot of benefit, but there's also this adventure by choice piece there. How do you navigate both of those and put them together?
That can be a really hard thing to navigate, Dave. And, it
Hmm.
comes up in my job today. You know,
Hmm.
um, Oftentimes I'm working with someone and I identify something that could be beneficial for them, and they
Hmm.
have hesitations about it. And
Hmm.
ultimately, I believe that we need to, at the end of the day, always respect people's choice,
Hmm.
and know that they see a different picture than us about their comfort zone, and they see a bigger picture than us.
Hmm.
And really, what my job is always going to be is to, one, like, acknowledge that it can be scary, acknowledge that it can be different, um,
Hmm.
and as a challenge, see how well you can understand that kid or maybe that adult's fear and hesitation or apprehension. How
Hmm.
deep can you go in their experience um, before you're trying to persuade or convince?
Hmm.
If a kid is scared about climbing, like, how much can you try to understand what is making climbing scary for them?
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
and then before you just say, "Hey, you should climbing," maybe talk to them more about what's going on with climbing, and what some of the real risks are, because there are real risks, and why you think it could be beneficial. You want to hit those three pieces of really explaining, the process, the benefits, and the risk of an activity, and also just really practice trust. Trust that kid's going to do what's the best for them, um, and also trust that we're all on our a unique journey. And it's really
Hmm.
hard in that moment to know, like, what's going to be the most impactful. I had kids
Hmm.
who sat out for a day of rock climbing because that's what they really wanted to do. And they came
Hmm.
back the next day and they're like, "Steven, I I went home after seeing out from rock climbing and I realized I don't want to be someone who, doesn't do things because that they scare me. I want to be someone who tries." Um,
Hmm.
and because I let them sit out, we had some more trust. And I could kind of
Hmm.
use that trust going forward to invite them to go mountain biking. And they
Hmm.
were still scared. It's
Hmm.
really scary for anyone who just learned how to ride a bike to go down a steep hill. Um, but, having that trust and having that respect, you can't ever have too much of those two things,
Hmm.
especially when you're dealing with people feeling a little bit scared, you know.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Where have you felt your personal life learnings in the outdoors? Like, are there any particular situations that come to mind that you really reflect back on in your life that were kind of pivotal moments down those lines?
One of them really comes to mind, and that is I I was able to go on a climbing trip at the end of my first year in college, and it was awesome, and I was really looking forward to it. And, a couple days before I left for that trip, I had some friends in college who they did some things that really hurt me, really affected my trust. I was just really sad about that. And I remember having these thoughts of like really not feeling good enough, really not feeling like I was someone who, deserved to have friends, and really feeling like maybe I deserved to have this hurtful thing happen to me. And I really just like, I didn't really feel connected to my personal strength. Um, and I remember going on this climbing trip, and, you know, initially I like didn't even really want to climb. I kind of had to like force myself to like tie in, and I wasn't really connected with my climbing. And over the course of, just kind of pushing myself a little bit and a little bit, I started to feel really strong. And not strong as in like, this physical, like, oh, I'm just climbing really, really difficult. But strong as in the sense of like, there's this thing that was scary to me, and this thing that I didn't want to do. And also I had these like really limiting beliefs about myself. And that in spite of all of those things, I can stand up and I can choose to do the things that are important to me in life. Um, and, I certainly have moments now where I still struggle with some of those same feelings. And it's probably a huge reason why I love to just come back to rock climbing. It's just connect with my body and just know that, like, even something that in the big picture looks really far and looks really hard, you can always just make tiny little steps towards it. Um, yeah.
I love that. I love that. Well, I wanted to share kind of some of the coming back to this environmental briefing, because this has been such a foundational piece of the organization. And I indicated that we're looking at some changes. They're based on a conversation in one of the podcasts a few weeks ago with Rose Gadd, who is 12 years old, and she was talking about her kind of model for assessing risk in the outdoors. And so like basically where we're going with this is to kind of de-academatize it a little bit and kind of take it from a 12-year-old perspective, and kind of move
Yeah.
it forward. And so we're calling it the PAPA model, PAPA, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But for our staff, like to kind of just even introduce it as a parent, as you were saying, there's so many times when we're looking at these different situations for our kids and trying to craft the right course forward and choose what's in their best interest. And parents are not always going to be there. And so this is like the internalization of like the parent's judgment, so to speak. So it's like the PAPA model. And the first P is pause, and just really teaching kids to stop and look around at their surroundings, think about where they are, what's going on, what the terrain is like, the weather, what's changing. So many times for kids, if they just stop, that everything changes, but they're so enthusiastic, they're so full of stoke. Sometimes it's hard to even get that pause to occur. So step one, pause. Step two, assess. And the way Rose put it, and the way she learned it in her family, she's like, I look at what's in front of me and I think, if something goes wrong, is this going to be bumps and bruises, hospital bed, or I'm dead? And to kind of like to take it into one of those three categories to kind of, try and really figure out what comes next. So that's the assess A. The next one is plan. And so kind of based on bumps and bruises, hospital bed, or dead, that's where, as you were saying, you kind of make a plan. What should the rules be? Do I slow down, avoid retreat? What are the things that are going to keep me safe? And then that final one is act, is to actually put that into practice and move forward. And the thing I really love about this is it's so actionable in the outdoors, our environmental briefings, and this kind of slight tweak on it. But really, this is the formula for life, to be able to develop judgment in social situations and all sorts of situations where it takes a moment to pause, check in inside and outside, see what's happening, assess the consequences, make a plan, and then craft your process going forward from there.
I love that. Dave, I don't know if we've connected about this yet, but I think I was the one who sent you that interview with Will Gadd and Alex Honnold,
Oh,
where Will
yes.
Gadd is talking
Yes.
about that with his daughter and how, his daughter's like, this bumps and bruises, Dad, but I think we can go
Yep.
ahead and like keep going down this
That's
show because
exactly it. Thank you for doing
it
that. Because then I contacted Will and said I'd like to interview, Rose and him together, and that's exactly where that came from. So I had forgotten that. Thanks for the full connection there.
Yeah, well, I like remember listening to I love podcasts. I was actually so excited to do this today. It's probably why I have a whole page of notes on my other tab. So I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I remember that coming up, and I probably said that to you, 3 minutes after listening to it. I like ran it back a couple times. I was like, "This is a kid doing an environmental briefing. This is what Avid is all about." And I love the Papa model. There's so many cool pieces there. Like when I'm hearing that, I'm just inspired, like how I could use that in my life. Just the just
Mhm.
pausing more
Pausing.
often.
Yeah.
Just like take a breath, look around, and be mindful for a second. That's
Hmm.
probably if 99% of people just did that one piece, I think that we would avoid, probably a ton of car accidents, a ton of things,
Yes.
that don't need to
Yeah.
happen. Because oftentimes, like, you know, going back to Avid, we used to say during our risk management conversations, go slow to go fast. That
Hmm.
if we're really thoughtful and intentional and take our time,
Hmm.
we're not going to get in the situations where a really bad mistake gets made that puts us behind track. And if we
Hmm.
feel like we have to rush and get stuff down, we might cut a corner that should not have been cut and end up
Hmm.
in a bad spot. Uh,
Hmm.
so that's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I'm excited by it. But well, looking again, just reflecting on your time at Avid and then your professional career since then, I want to ask you, kind of bringing it back because a lot of our hundreds of staff listen to this podcast as well. What is it that an individual who's working in the outdoors can feel empowered to do in order to kind of facilitate a great, in our case, camp experience for folks? Like, what, when it boils down to the when the rubber meets the road and the instructors out there, um, what are those things that really makes an instructor or can help an instructor facilitate that sort of a great camp experience?
Yeah. Oh, it's so hard to have a short answer to that question, I mean, because, you and I have, you know, worked together on staff training, spending, a pretty packed week full of things that is important to make that a great experience. You and I, outside of Avid staff trainings, have probably done a lot of researching and have a lot of conversations about what makes a great experience. Um, but if you asked me to pick one thing, um, what I would say is I would just invite people who are facilitating these experiences um, to challenge themselves to remember what it's like to be new at those experiences. Something that I really thought about a lot as an instructor was how, I would go to the same places, do the same activities every week, for multiple summers in a row. And I would get a sense of familiarity and a sense of comfortability. And also a little bit of that magic might have washed off for me. And something I would really try to constantly push myself to be in and, challenge my co-instructors to be in is to really try to imagine what it would be like to have it be your first time. You know, um, I was reminded of this walking up North Table Mountain once, which, as climbing instructors, we often kind of had like a little bit of a bad taste in our mouth about North Table Mountain. It was kind of like it was a more difficult climbing area for us to get set up. It was a more difficult hike to get there, and it was always kind of felt like it was really hot It's south facing. It kind of just bakes in the sun in July. It's one of the few climbing areas that we go to. And, the Colorado Avid programs, where you're unlikely to see any other climbing groups there. But, I was really inspired by I think it was, one of my camp directors at Watch Park, to remember what it was probably like for those kids having never done that hike, and how cool it is to, be in this parking lot and look way up this hill and see some cliffs and say, hey, we're going to go climb that, and how much excitement is going through their minds during the hike. They're probably not thinking, oh my gosh, this backpack weighs so much. And this is, the third time I've had to, bring 3 ropes up there this week. They're thinking about how exciting it is for them. And when they tie into the rope, maybe they've never tied into a climbing rope before. I've spent hundreds of hours tied into a climbing rope and trusting it. That's a different thing for them. And just as a general thought exercise, just trying to put yourself in those shoes, because that's how you are able to connect how you're providing that experience to someone who's new to it. And maybe instead of being at the bottom of that hike, instead of saying, hey, this is going to be long and kind of hot, you could say, hey, this is going to be a really cool hike. We're going to go all the way up there. Get excited. It's going to be an adventure. This might be really hard, but I think you can do it. And when you tie someone into that rope, letting them know, this might feel scary, and that totally makes sense. But I also want you to know, we're going to start by just climbing a couple feet up, and we're going to weight the rope and make sure everything feels really good for you. And, I invite you to push yourself a little bit, but talk to me if you think it's scary, because we can talk about that, and that makes a lot of sense.
It's wonderful. This whole theme of just seeing with new eyes, seeing experiences from the perspective of a kid in the first experience. It is a sage advice for life, in enjoying every moment. One of my guests here in the last couple of weeks was Rafa, one of our international staff from Brazil. And he was talking about the first time he came to work for Avid. It was the first time he'd come to the United States, and he was flying into Colorado, and he drops down below the clouds and he sees the mountains and the snow, and he just starts sobbing. He just totally starts crying, looking out the window. And he's like, everyone's looking at me. They're just like, what's going on? He's like, it was so beautiful. It was so unbelievable. And even as he was describing it, I was like, oh my gosh, how many times have I flown into Denver where it's disappeared. It's so beautiful, and I just don't even see it anymore. And so that's a wonderful invitation, I think, for all of us to end with, is let's go out today and look at something that we see often with new eyes, and bring the stoke in seeing it for the first time as a kiddo would.
Yeah.
So, Stephen, thank you so much for your time today. That was so insightful. I appreciate you sharing yourself and your journey, what you're doing now, and your work with Avid. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, no worries, Dave. It was so great to chat with you, and I just look forward to staying in contact. And it's always cool to see what Avid's up to on my Instagram, and still hear from people like yourself and other instructors. I'm just so grateful to have been a part of something as awesome as Avid. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks again. I hope you enjoyed hearing from this Avid Adventurer as much as I did. Join me every week as we continue to explore the inner landscapes and outer accomplishments of our guests. And if you know someone who you think would make a great interview, please reach out to me at the email in the show notes. I look forward to reconnecting next week.